Happy Friday, DawgNation. So good to see you for DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. So much to get into, from last night's first round of the NFL draft. Also, Georgia possibly on commit watch later on this afternoon. We'll talk to Jeff Sentel about that before we're done and try to cover a ton of ground, as it was a great night for Eric Stokes. A little more waiting for guys like Azeez Ojulari and Tyson Campbell, and a lot of gaps to fill in between. We will do it all next as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is a lot to unpack from last night's NFL draft, and as you might imagine, that's where we'll begin on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. It was clearly a great night for Georgia cornerback Eric Stokes, and we will get to that. Clearly, he deserves to be celebrated today. It was also a little bit of a surprise, at least to some, that outside linebacker Azeez Ojulari did not hear his name called in the first round. And I want to begin right there, because that's like the next thing that should happen for Georgia here in this draft, seeing Azeez going very high in the second round. You have to imagine one of the most coveted names still on the board. I thought that the SEC Network's Peter Burns summed it up succinctly, and probably capturing the feeling of a lot of people, knowing that with pick 33 about to be made, that Ojulari is still out there and eligible to be taken. This is what Peter Burns said on Twitter. I'll show this to you. He says, "I'm still stunned," and I think that word stunned is very interesting from Burns, stunned that Georgia's Azeez Ojulari didn't go in the first round. There will be some phone calls made tonight. This is obviously tweeted last night, Burns says, to try to move up and grab a young man who's only getting started at being a dominant player. And I think that statement from Peter Burns is so important. That when so many guys opted out of last season. And listen, people have their own reasons for doing that. I'm not going to bag on anybody who did. But Ojulari played, and he played at a high level, and he put up huge numbers in the SEC. And, he's obviously come back from an injury that kept him off the field in 2018. What Ojulari is doing is blossoming as a player before our eyes. And obviously, I guess I assume that one of the first-round teams would reward him for that. And whoever does end up drafting him, I believe, is going to get a really good player, which actually really brings me to what I want to say about Ojulari right now. That the silver lining to all of this is Ojulari, who played his college ball, obviously, at the University of Georgia, and also played high school ball there at Marietta High School. Maybe the silver lining on this is that early here tonight in the second round, maybe there's a chance that Ojulari actually ends up being taken by what we would many of us who live here in the state of Georgia view as our hometown team, the Atlanta Falcons. One of the guys who pointed this out was Justin Felder, who works for Fox 5 in Atlanta, one of the local sports stations, or I should say one of the local TV stations here in Atlanta, pointing on a stat that I guess I was somewhat aware of, but maybe I hadn't seen just written in sort of bold print in a while like this, as it's actually been since 2011, since the Atlanta. Can we have that tweet? Can we show that? Yeah, Felder saying that could be a chance the Falcons draft their first player from UGA since 2011 tomorrow night. I didn't quite realize it had been that long. Obviously mentioning Ojulari there and Tyson Campbell, who I do think is going to be a big player for some organization. But at the front end of the second round, it would seem to my mind more likely to be Ojulari going than Tyson Campbell there at that spot. At least that's the best guess that I can have. And I'm obviously a Falcons fan in addition to being a Georgia fan. I care way more about college football, care way more about that brand of the sport. That's why I talk about it every single day. But I do pay attention to this from the Falcons' perspective. And I can tell you that I would love nothing more. And I know a lot of Georgia fans feel the same way about this. I would love nothing more than to see the Falcons pull the trigger on Ojulari tonight. It just sort of seems like the right thing to do. And I want to be really clear about something for a moment. That I'm not one of these people who believe, the Falcons intentionally don't draft Georgia players. I'm not someone who believes that. But I do think over the years, and this is one of those things that kind of as a backstory is kind of built over time, year over year over year. I think over the years, the Falcons have had chances to draft Georgia players and have not done that for whatever reason, and it kind of sticks in the mind of a lot of UGA fans. Not because the Falcons are intentionally biased against UGA or anything like that. It's just a natural I guess, bias in favor of UGA players that Georgia fans have well, if I'm rooting for this guy in the red and black on Saturday, then it'd be kind of nice to root for him in that same color scheme when he plays for the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday. Georgia fans should obviously be forgiven for the fact that that's just more fun for them to see Georgia players go to the Atlanta Falcons. And some of those high-profile examples over the years where that hasn't been the case, that just sticks out in people's memory. I'll go way back to the 80s here for a moment. Falcons take running back in a draft. They take Steve Broussard, a running back out of Washington State, and no one ever really heard from him ever again. Same draft, the Falcons would have had a chance if they wanted to take Georgia's Rodney Hampton. Hampton goes on to the New York Giants, has a good career, Pro Bowl type stuff, and Georgia obviously missed out on that. Back in the 90s, there was a wide receiver draft. Falcons take Jamie German, I think out of Miami. Am I right about that? You don't really hear much from him in his pro career. You could have, in the same draft, you could have taken Hines Ward, and Ward goes on to the Steelers, becomes a Super Bowl MVP, and I would say borderline Hall of Famer. That's a miss for the Falcons when they could have taken a Georgia guy. Just a few years ago, if you want to make this a little bit more modern, Falcons take Vic Beasley out of Clemson when they could have taken Georgia running back Todd Gurley. Now, they finally got Gurley years later, but obviously to take advantage of the best of Gurley at the time of that draft, that's something that a lot of Georgia fans would have liked to have seen them do. So, as I said before, I don't believe it's any kind of anti-UGA bias for the Falcons. I just think it's natural that Georgia fans who also root for the Falcons would like to see more Georgia guys on that Falcons roster. And as I said before, maybe I knew this, but it just, I don't know, it just that number kind of stuck out to me. 2011 it's been since Atlanta has drafted a Georgia player. Azeez Ojulari might be there for the taking early in the second round tonight, and I am calling upon the Atlanta Falcons. I'm using the full weight of the platform we have here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, saying draft this guy tonight. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Ojulari gets after quarterbacks. He's a terrific guy for the locker room, an amazing success story there at UGA, a guy who I think is going to have a bright and shining pro career no matter where he goes. And obviously, selfishly, I'd love for it to be right here in Atlanta, so we'll follow that and see where it goes. Now, let me shift gears and go to this here for a moment. Last night was a terrific night for Georgia cornerback Eric Stokes, selected number 29 overall by the Green Bay Packers. And look, I'm selfish. One of the things we talk about a lot is how the draft can be a great commercial for your program. And, boy, it looks good for Georgia to see a former three-star pick taken in the first round. But I do want to catch myself sometimes that I don't make the sum total of our draft conversation be about that. I do want to make sure that I kind of acknowledge what this really was last night, which is a great night for Stokes individually. In particular for him. And I feel really lucky, I'm sure many of you do as well, to have been able to be an observer to the maturation process that he's gone through during his time at Georgia. And yes, he did come in as a three-star recruit. And yes, I do think, like many other Georgia players would say, his time at UGA, developing him is part of the reason why he was able to hear his name called last night and getting a chance to, figuratively speaking, kind of hug Roger Goodell. He got a chance to, to do that because of his time at Georgia. But this is a personal win for Stokes. And as someone who's had a chance to interview him a few times and always come away just really enjoying his personality and glad to have been able to spend some time with him. Man, I tell you, I kind of jumped off my couch last night when Stokes got drafted. I know many of you probably did there as well. I was just really happy for him. And Georgia coach Kirby Smart put out a little video, kind of almost a personal message to Stokes delivered through social media. And if you want to capture really the feel-good nature of all of this, the message that Smart sent to Stokes, I think, is a pretty good example. This is some of what Kirby had to say.
Big Red, happy for you, man. Proud of you. Can't wait to see what you do. You've worked so hard for this. I know it means so much to you and your family, and how much your sister means to you. And you've come a long way from that skinny guy that first came here. And you've put so much work in the weight room, so much into the development, and can't wait to see you excel at that next level. Go Dogs.
Yeah, I think that's true from Kirby all the way around. It's a tremendous, tremendous moment for Stokes and a great chance for us all to celebrate the way in which he grew as a player during his time at Georgia. I think he's going to be a terrific pro. Now, here's what's funny, and I'll say this for a few seconds. Like, for those of you who've had a chance to ever meet Eric, or, like I said, I've interviewed him a few times, he's like the nicest guy in the world, best locker room guy, easy to get along with. You would imagine a terrific teammate. Eric's teammates do seem to love him, from the best that I can tell. What's funny is he is now walking like just headfirst into actually a pretty massive controversy there in Green Bay that he has nothing to do with, but he's going to become kind of a part of, because you saw probably the big news around the NFL before the draft yesterday is the fact that Green Bay quarterback Aaron Rodgers wants out of Green Bay because of contract negotiation, things like that. He's not happy that Jordan Love was selected as a quarterback last year, and the other draft picks last year were used on defense, not giving any weapons. Rodgers just doesn't feel like he's been properly equipped with the weapons that he needs to succeed. And so last night, on the heels of Rodgers saying he wants out of Green Bay, Packers saying we have no plans to trade him, all of a sudden, first pick, everybody wondering, okay, are you going to try to appease Aaron Rodgers and get him some help? No, they draft cornerback. In fact, a lot of folks talking about this on Twitter. I'll show you an example from Ian Rappaport here. Rap Sheet, one of the biggest names covering the NFL, kind of summed all of this up in terms of what all this is about. Rappaport writes that with the Packers and quarterback Aaron Rodgers at odds in a very public way, Green Bay takes a quarterback, obviously. I should say a cornerback, obviously, mentioning Georgia's Eric Stokes right there. So that's kind of what Stokes walks into, kind of a controversial situation in Green Bay. And in fact, when he meets with local media there in Wisconsin, you have to imagine a lot of questions will come his way about that. This is none of Eric's doings, and Eric's going to handle all this really smoothly and really easily. I think Packers fans, apart from the Rodgers fiasco, are going to really enjoy what they like from Eric Stokes, but it is interesting that he's walking into a pretty controversial situation there in Green Bay, and I'm sure he'll handle that well. So that's kind of where you are. A little bit of a surprise move up for Eric Stokes, a little bit of a surprise move down from Azeez Ojulari. As the second round begins tonight, Georgia should be prominently involved in all this. Azeez going fairly early. As we mentioned, Tyson Campbell kind of in the mix there as well. Should be a big weekend to come for Georgia when it comes to the NFL draft. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really happy to have you as a part of the program today. And, of course, big thanks to our friends at Kroger who are getting us ready for Mother's Day. And keep this in mind that we've been talking about our five-star moms deal, but also for those of you who want to honor your own mom in kind of a five-star way, Kroger certainly gives you a chance to do that. Big savings going on right now. Also, big opportunities to, you want to learn about brunch recipes or, things along those lines. Or you want to send flowers or kind of some sort of art and craft type thing. The kids can do greeting cards, gift cards, everything else. It's all there when it comes to Kroger and Mother's Day. You can check it out online, Kroger.com/Mother's Day for more details on that. That's Kroger.com/Mother's Day for more details on that. Good to have you with us as a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger here today. It is Jeff Sentel coming up. We'll talk a bunch of stuff with Jeff. The first and foremost, there is a strong possibility that Georgia's on commitment watch later on today with four-star wide receiver Denell Morissette. So Jeff's going to tell us a lot more about that. We'll do that with him coming up. Before we do that, though, I want to go around the doghouse here. And there was a very interesting moment in last night's draft where when the Cincinnati Bengals took Jamar Chase, number 5 overall, you could tell that Booger McFarland didn't like the pick. And he kind of wanted to make the case that they should have gone offensive line there. A lot of Bengals fans did. We've actually even talked about that on this show, that there was a debate going on there in Southern Ohio about should it be offensive line, should it be weapon for Joe Burrow, and it seemed like McFarland wanted that to be the offensive lineman there. And I guess maybe because I work in media, I've done some TV, things like that, maybe I'm more likely to notice this. But it was very interesting to watch Mike Greenberg, who was hosting the show last night for ESPN, for those of you who are watching on that network, as opposed to the NFL network. Very interesting to watch Greenberg, who was hosting the show, trying to pivot McFarland off the negativity. In other words, whoever's producing the NFL draft or whoever's like focus testing the way in which the draft talked about, it was fairly obvious based on the way they were trying to cover this pick that the ESPN people behind the scenes did not believe that negativity about the number 5 pick was the right way to go about this, because Booker was trying to say they should have drafted offensive linemen, and Greenberg, the host, kept trying to pivot it back to, yeah, but there's a lot to like about Jamar Chase, and you could really kind of tell the push and pull, the tug of war going on about how they were going to cover the number 5 overall pick. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because I think we have the same thing kind of around here sometimes, is that when you look at the way in which an NFL draft unfolds, or really anything unfolds, obviously it is just better, more enjoyable, more appealing to the ears of certain folks to have the positivity accentuated as opposed to the negativity. For instance, when it comes to Georgia and the fact that maybe last night Georgia didn't have quite as prominent a presence in the first round as some UGA fans would have liked for that to be the case. And hard not to notice the way in which some folks not connected to UGA, kind of outside the bubble of all of us here at DawgNation, or maybe even going so far as to mock Georgia for not having more first-round picks taken. I'll show you an example of this. There's a guy named Tim Watts who covers Alabama who wrote on Twitter, it's like a who left the dogs out, who. Kind of, basically, going back to the 90s. Is that how far we're going back for who let the dogs out? Going back to the 90s for that, but instead of let the dogs out, it's left the dogs out, essentially saying the dogs were left out of the 2021 NFL draft. And obviously a lot of Georgia fans are kind of aggravated by that, and Georgia fans want to celebrate Stokes here today, and maybe they feel like, guys like Campbell or Ojulari should have been taken. But I do think this is worth spending a little bit of time on just for a moment. And you've heard me talk before about the perception when it comes to the NFL draft of it can be a great commercial for your program. When you have guys going early, it just makes it look good for future recruiting, and that's true. But the big issue with Georgia only having the 1 first-round pick last night is actually not so much about perception for future recruits. It's really more about the reality on the scene in the moment. That when you see Alabama have so many guys taken, it just seemed like there was an Alabama guy called every other name. Like, the guys are leaving the green room there, and it's like just a line of hugs from other Alabama players in that same green room on their way to the podium last night. When you see that unfolding over and over again, I mean, you are reminded about just how tough it is to match what Alabama's done. And recruiting classes alone are not to do that. You actually have to fully develop those guys once you get them. And once again, to go back to the reality on the ground, Alabama has won 2 of the last 4 national championships. They won in 2017. They won this most recent season in 2020. But think about those 2 years in the middle, 2018 and 2019, when they did not win the national championship. Y'all, think for a second about what it took to beat them. I mean, if I have the numbers correct here, and I think I do, the LSU team that beat Alabama in 2019, they now have had 6 first-round picks off that roster, with more to come, with guys like Derek Stingley still in Baton Rouge. They've now had 6 first-round picks off that roster. Am I right about that? I think there's a total of 16 first-round picks that played in the game between LSU and Alabama back in 2019, the one that LSU won in Tuscaloosa. That's what it took to beat Alabama in 2019. 6 first-round picks and counting off the same roster of the team that got it done. Same thing for Clemson, who beat Alabama in 2018 to win the national championship. Am I right in saying that Clemson roster now has 5 first-round picks, with possibly more to come, of guys who were still there at Clemson? 5 first-round picks, what it took to beat Alabama in 2018. 6 first-round picks, what it took to beat them in 2019. Nobody was able to do that in 2020. So this is what it's really about for Georgia. It's not just about having Roger Goodell calling names so that the recruiting pipeline stays nice and fluid. That's not what this is about. It's about having enough top-end talent just to be able to beat a team like that. And right now, Georgia hasn't crossed that final frontier yet. Now, there's nothing to say that it can't happen here this year with what's about to undergo and take place here in 2021. It certainly can. But it is not easy to do. I mean, you're asking a lot of guys to break in the direction of household name, to become well-known, become, a top-end type player. And the list of guys who have a chance to do that on the Georgia roster is as long as my arm at least. But the actual, coming to fruition of all that is a much different step all the way around. So hear what I'm saying, don't hear what I'm not saying. It's not my goal to be negative here and say there's something greatly wrong with the Georgia program or anything like that. Those of you that listen and watch on a regular basis, surely you must understand that. What my point to bring out here is that for those of us who are so hungry to see Georgia get over the hump and win a national championship. For those of us who are so tired of, seeing, arch nemesis like Alabama kind of at the top of the college football world, I do think we have the obligation, especially for those of us who kind of talk into microphones for a living and do kind of the media type thing. I think we have an obligation to be honest that the task of overtaking what Alabama has done is really, really difficult. It takes about a half dozen first-round picks, and that is what Georgia has to find a way to develop here between now and the start of the season and this fall to really think they have a legitimate chance of kind of getting that done. So that is Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. Before I bring on Jeff Sentel, let me also remind you about this. Speaking of Athens, where it all went down and has gone down with guys getting ready for the NFL draft, so many of you love that community, and you just understand there are aspects of the Athens real estate world that kind of make it different than the other real estate markets here in our great state of Georgia, which means that if you're going to move to Athens or you want to retire there or you're looking to get involved in an investment situation for students or, Airbnb type stuff, or if you're looking for one of those game day condos, things like that, you want to have a local expert on your side to kind of help walk you through the specific intricacies that make the Athens real estate market red hot right now, but also, somewhat challenging for people who don't know it, who don't live it each and every day. That's what my friends at 5 Market Realty are going to be able to do for you. It's the number 5, 5mrealty.com is the website to get in touch with 5 Market Realty. They're on the 2021 Bulldog 100 list. When you do business with them, you're doing business with good dog people, but more importantly than that, they know all about the Athens real estate scene. As I said before, the game day condos, the investment opportunities, for folks who want to retire there, and it's amazing how hot that has become, or people who just want to live there, raise a family there, and the great community that it is. The folks at 5 Market Realty know all about that, so find them online, the number 5, 5mrealty.com. That's 5mrealty.com today. All right, thank you so much for being here with us. We'll talk more about the draft before we're done and all the other big things that happened for the SEC last night. We'll do all of that, but for now, commitment watch, transfer portal watch, a little bit on the draft there as well. Let's talk to our buddy Jeff Sentel.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, we'll get ready to talk to our buddy Jeff Sentel. And obviously, as I said before, there is a lot to get to with Jeff involving what might be a busy day for Georgia, possible commitment later on this afternoon. We'll pay close attention to that. But, Jeff, I want to talk to you before we get there. You cover these guys before they get to Georgia, and I think you would say, much like I have said, that when it comes to meeting someone via interviews and getting to know them maybe just a little bit, I don't know that there's anyone who's more enjoyable to be around than what Eric Stokes has been for Georgia over the course of these last few years. You knew him as a recruit back when really very few people knew anything about him at all. He was not a highly rated recruit. We've been through this many, many times. But he's a first-round pick of the Green Bay Packers, one of the most hallowed organizations, one of the most recognizable uniforms, and Stokes gets a chance to wear that thing and gets a chance to sign himself a life-changing, generational wealth type contract. What an amazing American success story!
You got it. Brandon, that's one of those things where, I don't know, maybe this is me getting in a certain stage of my career, but man, you just can't help but, just feel for these young men and just glow inside for what they've accomplished and what they've done. That Eric Stokes story, gosh, that's a great story. I remember talking to him when he wasn't sure what he was. He was an athlete. He played a lot of running back in high school. He was blazing fast, but I've had some Packer friends reach out. They're all like, "Hey, tell me about this guy." And you know what? I can say 7 things about Eric Stokes about why, if I was a billionaire NFL owner, why I would give him a $25 million contract. And the best thing we can say here, Brandon, is not one of those to me that comes to mind among the first 5 or 6, 7 things, is that 4.3 speed. And I know that's what qualifies him as a first rounder. I know what makes him fly up draft boards, but you want to talk about a guy, one of the funniest things is when you write about these young men as we do and you try to define them as a human, not just as a football game victory delivery device. And you hear so many people that are DawgNation readers and listeners and viewers, and they're like, okay, I read that story about this kid. I couldn't wait to get to see him on the field. Well, I bumped into him, yada, 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 after a game or at a gas station or at a restaurant. And, man, that's exactly the young man he was. I must know about 10 Eric Stokes stories. I got to visit with him recently after G-Day. We talked about his career and talked about where he was going, where he was headed. All he really cared about really was the opportunity and the chance. But if he had a choice, he wanted to go to an NFL team with no state income tax. So you know how it is, Brandon. That's how everybody would be, right? I mean, they start thinking about that generational money and taking care of people because they've worked so hard. And I mean, Stokes is a guy. Like, I say this a lot when I get to know these young men and people ask me about them, or like coaches ask me about them, and I say, listen, there's a phrase we have for a good dude. And you're going to be like, this kid's going to be professional. He's going to take care of himself. But then there's another shelf for an excellent young man and an excellent dude. And really, those guys, Eric Stokes is one of those guys. He makes those good dudes kind of look kind of paltry by comparison, because there's even a big gap from a good dude to a kid like Eric Stokes.
And so, Jeff, what I'll add to this conversation for a moment is, and I've told our audience this week, that obviously I have a bias in favor of Georgia players. I want to see them drafted high. I want to see them do well, and that's not a surprising thing. But in addition to that, I feel like I kind of have another bias when it comes to draft time, and the fact that I want what you do on the field to matter. Now, you mentioned the fact that Stokes has run really blazing 40-yard dash times leading up to his drafting, and that obviously gets the attention of draft scouts. But I think when you watched the film, you saw a guy that played well for Georgia, even dating back to 2018 when he came in kind of maybe midway through the season. This is a guy who made plays on the field. And I'd say the same thing about Azeez Ojulari, who obviously put up big numbers for Georgia a year ago. That when I see guys, and listen, I'm not going to criticize somebody who chose to opt out or anything like that, but when I see a guy who did opt out, drafted high, or when I see a guy who didn't put up very much in the way of numbers, drafted high, that's not my preference. My preference would be, especially if I'm an NFL GM, give me somebody who made plays at a high college level against other elite competition. And that's one of the reasons why, if I'm the Green Bay Packers, I'd feel pretty good about Stokes, is the fact that this guy who made plays on the field during games, and those are the guys that I kind of want to see honored, because I want to see college football matter, but also just as someone who kind of puts himself as like an armchair personnel man, that's the kind of person I would feel pretty good about drafting. I want to draft guys who've made plays during games.
Yeah, right. I mean, Brandon, that's kind of the science of it to me. I mean, these guys are projected and ranked and signed, and they're put on the field to win games. They're put on the field to produce. And I have a hard time, especially with first-round collateral, first-round real estate, picking a guy that just hasn't done it yet. I mean, you expect that light to come on when everybody on the field is an NFL dude, an NFL quality player. Most of those guys on the field are going to be 5, 6, 7, 8 years older than this first-round talent that you're taking right there. I mean, all it is about, Brendan, is putting it together for the game. And that's why you look at a guy like Stokes, and let's be honest, what was the biggest criticism of Stokes going into his draft profile? Had to be the ball skills, had to be not enough interceptions. But look at last year, 2 pick sixes. I think he has 4 interceptions in 9 SEC games. I mean, you see everything about Stokes, and that's a guy that's continuing to get better and better. He's going to be able to run with everybody. He's going to be able to stay in phase with everybody. He's going to work whatever shoes he has on off every day to make sure that he is a competent professional. And, I mean, you want to talk about – this is one of those things, Brendan. I think we need to put this in the nomenclature here on our programs where everybody points to, okay, look right there at DeAndre Baker, or, oh, look right there at Jordan Davis and what he's done. I mean, really, what Eric Stokes has done, I think he was like the number 60 athlete in the country. Really late addition to Georgia's 2017 class. Probably was likely to go to other schools for a time there. And to see what he's done now, and he's another really huge success story for Georgia and that defensive back room. It's a great thing to see for those that follow this program.
So obviously, early tonight in the second round, you could potentially see names like Tyson Campbell called. Certainly expect to see Azeez Ojulari going very early. I've already made my case off the top of the program. I'd love to see the Atlanta Falcons select Ojulari, let him stay at home, turn that into a feel-good story. But, beyond that, Jeff, as I mentioned before, I don't revel in being in any way negative or anything like that. That's not what I think, people sometimes want to hear. But it is worth pointing out that when Alabama has so many first-round picks taken, that when you look at Georgia trying to match that, trying to get over that hump of the Crimson Tide, I mean, think about what has beaten Alabama in recent years. An LSU team that I think now has 6 first-round picks off that roster in 2019, with more to come, at least, with Derek Stingley possibly next year. I think Clemson's now up to 5 off the 2018 roster with, who knows what happens to a guy like Justin Ross now coming back. They may have more off that 2018 before it's all said and done. That really and truly the final frontier for Georgia is producing those multiples of first-round picks that allows Georgia to kind of go step for step and keep pace and actually win those games against Alabama and the very best teams in the country. That's what's still left to be done for Georgia. And I'm not going to spike the football by saying it hasn't happened yet, but it clearly has not happened yet.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at the comparatives, Brandon. I mean, Georgia's 2017 class, you got 3 first-rounders and you got 1 second-rounder in DeAndre Swift. You keep going forward. It really, the conversation halts in my mind with, I don't know, Brandon, I know you don't want to turn your program into the Alabama Minute, much less the Alabama Hour. But, I mean, that is truly phenomenal what they've done there with that 2017 class. There's the 2 national championships that the 2017 class had linchpin, anchor moments as a part of it. I think they had 3 guys finish in the top 5 in the Heisman's. I'm not trying to bury the lead, but I think everybody's seen this lead here about how they had 8 first-round draft picks out of the same signing class in 2017. That's 2 quarterbacks. That's, I believe, 3 receivers. That's 2 offensive linemen. That's 1 running back. Do you see the comparison right there? Look what I just rattled off. 2 quarterbacks, 3 receivers, 2 offensive linemen, and 1 wide receiver. Did you hear a defensive player in there at all? Well, they had a defensive player last year go in the second round in Xavier McKinney, and then you've got a guy like Dylan Moses, one of their top tier 5-stars in that class. Dylan Moses will probably go in the top 100 picks today as well. I mean, I don't know how you can ever get anything more out of a signing class than what Alabama did right there in 2017.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. And look, Georgia's going to have a chance to do a lot of things here on the field this upcoming season, and there are a lot of potential names that can emerge as first-round picks in the 2022 draft. We all acknowledge that. I guess my point, though, is I just don't want to gloss over it and be like, Georgia's going to, wait till next year for Georgia. Next year's going to be Georgia's turn to have, half dozen names called and, things along those lines. I just think it's really appropriate for those of us who are so hungry to see Georgia reach that level. Jeff, I just think it's really appropriate for us to acknowledge just how difficult it really is. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And just being on the kind of the precipice of getting it done does not guarantee that you take that final step. This is really important for Georgia to fully develop all that top-end talent from the first, number 1 ranked 2018 class and highly ranked 2019 class and kind of all that elite talent that's still at Georgia. Are really important those guys get fully developed so they can have the kind of year in 2021 that we've seen Clemson, LSU, and Alabama enjoy over the course of the last 3 years.
Yeah, Brendan, the words that I'm gonna boldface italicize here that you just said is really important. And here's what's really important. You look at one of the things that were going through my mind watching the draft last night is I think that the continued narrative for me is you got to get the right guys. It's really important to get the right guys. You see Rashad Bateman out of the state of Georgia. He was a 2018 type guy, 2017 type guy, and he ends up going to Minnesota out of Tift County. Why? Because a lot of the big boy schools, including Georgia, it wasn't just Georgia, but they got on him real late, and Bateman decided to be loyal and stick rowing the boat, I guess, with P.J. Fleck in Minnesota. You see another name, Elijah Moore. He didn't go in the first round, but he's expected to go really high in the second round, especially at that receiver position, Brandon. I know that is want to kick the can down the road topic there for you, but get the right receivers. Imagine what Georgia's offense would have looked like the last 2 or 3 seasons with an Elijah Moore and a Rashad Bateman. And I know that's not revisionist. Nobody wants to hear that. But it's about getting the right guys. And that's why I keep saying this. I mean, I don't know if it's a T-shirt or something, but I keep saying the biggest difference between what Georgia has done getting right there to the precipice, that term you like to use, and then what Alabama has continued to knock down the door, Clemson as well, is what they've done recruiting the wide receiver position. That is the biggest difference. Because everybody's going to go, how come Georgia can't have that? Why isn't Georgia having that yet? Well, you got to look to that wide receiver position and see. You just got to hit on more of those guys, and that makes the whole offensive machine just hum so much more efficiently at a championship level.
And we don't have time to do all this today, but at some point in time, I do think it'd be really interesting to see. For the 2017 class, Alabama brings in all those big-time receivers, Ruggs and Judy and Devontae Smith, obviously, ended up winning the Heisman Trophy that none of us could have predicted there at the time. And they bring in those big receivers. And at the time, Alabama did not have a great reputation for throwing the football. Jalen Hurts has had a good year in 2016, but not really as a throwing quarterback. He was kind of thought of as more of a running quarterback. He was, frankly, probably not quite such a finished product throwing the football. And then prior to that, Alabama was just not – they'd had Calvin Ridley in the program, of course, but somehow, some way, Alabama struck gold with those 2017 wide receivers. Of course, Waddle comes in for the class of 2018, but they struck gold with that trio of 2017 wide receivers without really having much of a throw game to kind of put on display to convince those guys to come. One of these days, the backstory about how all of that happened, I think, is probably worth revisiting because that was obviously the transformational moment for the Alabama program.
Yeah, they had like the flex a little bit. They had like their Julio Jones legacy there, and then they had Calvin Ridley there. But they were able to marginalize or weaponize what reputation they had at receiver and then turn that into it is an absolute juggernaut pipeline. This is going to be a bad chapter in the novel, but Alabama's recruited receivers better than they ever have in the 2021 class. They got 4 top 100 receivers in the 2021 class. So what is it? The rich getting richer. I can think of a better term for that, man. It's almost like Dubai, Saudi Arabian oil prince money are getting richer or whatever. Because, man, you look at this stuff, what they're doing right now. And here's one thing that everybody's in the 5 stars and the 4 stars and the 3 stars. Well, check this. Alabama's 2017 class that we just spent a minute or so trumpeting right there, they didn't even really hit on a lot of their 5-star guys. They didn't hit on Dylan Moses. He was, I think, their 2nd or 3rd rated guy. They didn't hit on a guy like LeBron Ray, who's still there and will be coming back to Alabama for another season in 2021. That's another 5-star lineman. Look at that defensive side of the ball. Brandon, I think it all falls, the theory I have is look what's happened over the last 10 to 15 years. High school players are throwing the ball and practicing throwing the ball more than they ever have before in the history of this game. That's the quarterback instruction. That's the wide receiver instruction with greats like Terrence Edwards funneling back into the game. And Brandon, you can get a 7-on-7 going just about any time now where inside drill, run games. That's the ability now for that passing game to be polished year-round and to have competition and develop that throw game and catch game year-round. And you're seeing these players that look like great receivers in the high school ranks and looking like one and talking like one and acting like one. You're seeing those players become exactly that in college football and now in pro football.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. By the way, speaking of wide receivers, we're going to have a chance to maybe see Georgia add one before it's done here today. At least the possibility of that exists. I'll tell you about that and get Jeff Sentel's thoughts about that too. But before that, springtime, great time for a getaway. Obviously in the Atlanta area, short drive, maybe what you're looking for. No better place to think about than the beautiful mountains of western North Carolina. And my friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort with the new reimagined, healthy and safe, socially distant gaming floor. Also gourmet restaurants and world-class shopping opportunities, luxury spa. Just a really, really wonderful getaway. The book is now open. You can do sports gaming right there in the mountains of western North Carolina as well. It is the Harris Cherokee Casino Resort property, is the original property, and Harris Cherokee Valley River. This is a great chance for you to get away here this spring. To find out more details about them, check them out online at Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. You can find out a whole lot more about the Harris Cherokee Casino Resort and the Harris Cherokee Valley River. 2 great properties, both just a 2-hour drive from Atlanta. Less of a drive than that from where I'm sitting right now is North Cobb High School, and that is the location of Denellen Morissette, a 4-star wide receiver for the class of 2022. And Morissette putting it out on Twitter here over the course of the last 24 hours that today is decision day for him. He's saying yesterday that he's committing today here at 2 p.m. Jeff, this seems to be one. It's a name we've talked about before, of course, but this seems to be a player that Georgia's pretty heavily in the mix for. What's the chances that UGA is on commit watch later on today?
Yeah, that's what's that online chatter you talk to, Brandon? I think all the ants are kind of marching in a certain direction. The Nylon is a guy that, first of all, 4-star wide receiver. I think I think he's the type of guy that's the type of prospect that the Georgia football offense can use more of. They need more guys like a Denilan Morissette. You saw what he did in 7A football. You've seen what he does for Hustle Inc. on a 7-on-7 circuit. He played brilliantly last year for Brookwood High School in an offense that had a lot of weapons. And that's a guy that he told me a while back. Obviously, Denilan's probably one of the more honest and upfront recruits you could ever talk to. And he told me a while back that he was almost ready to commit about a month ago, and he felt like he already had the decision in mind. And now it's probably not even a month later, and he's ready to roll out with his decision before May gets here. And it's funny because Denilan has all these official visits set up in June, and most players that are in his kind of position right now are just going to wait it out, ride out the month of May until they really get to their discovery process. But for him, there's always been the lure. I think we reported this maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. The lure for him was always Alabama, and he's like, well, Alabama's not rocking me right now. They're not talking to me like these other schools are, and that's fine. They can do what they want. I've got to do what I need to do for my career. And without the lure of the Crimson Tide, and it's a familiar subject, I think, Brandon, I know the way you like to be an expert showrunner and formatter. You wanted me to get me talking about Alabama receivers because then it would all dovetail and segue into Denilan Morissette. But you got a four-star receiver. You got a guy that checks all the boxes. I think there's only a handful of guys that if Georgia is fortunate enough to get his commitment and eventually sign Denilan Morissette, there's only about a handful of names that Georgia has signed over the last 4 or 5 years that I would say, okay, forget the rankings, that this guy's clearly a better prospect coming into college football than Denilan Morissette is. I think he's big. I think he's got great ball skills. I think he's an effective yards after catch runner. I think he's very polished. He's always put a lot of concrete work into his game. And I'll be excited to see where he goes at 2 p.m. today, too.
All right, so I want to ask you about one more thing before we let you go, but let me just kind of dovetail on the back of this. Give me a little bit more of a thumbnail sketch for those of us who haven't maybe seen as much of his film or just trying to play catch-up here. Give me a little bit more of a thumbnail about Morissette as a player for a moment.
Yeah, so he's a guy that you saw him last year finally get connected with a big-time offense at Brookwood and a big-time quarterback in Dylan Lonergan, a 2023 arm that has gotten all the offers, just picked up an Alabama offer lately. And, Brandon, he became unguardable really in some of the biggest games last year for Brookwood. I remember games where he has like seven catches, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. You see him at the 7-on-7 events, very hard to cover. He's very linked in with guys like Marquise Gross-Killebrew. That was a former teammate there with him at Brookwood. Very linked in with a guy like Gunnar Stockton, man. Gunnar Stockton and Denilan Morissette, they've been playing together in some sort of postseason all-star game format for like the last, most of their careers, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, all the way through middle school. That's a guy that would have an instant and an easy rapport there with Gunnar Stockton. And for Georgia to do what it wants to do in the 2022 class offensively, you gotta add a name like Kojo Antwi, you gotta add a name like Oscar Delp. And those are guys that they're all fast sprint. They all know each other really well. Playing on the same 7-on-7 teams and getting on those bus rides to those long tournaments. You've got a guy that I think you won't hear a lot of people say the term needs to put on weight or needs to get stronger or needs to add a lot of polish because he's really raw. I think Denilan is probably a top 200 level prospect. 225 level prospect. I think he's one of the top 25 receivers in the country, top 30 receivers in the country on the composite. And the fact is, Brandon, I'll just say it again, Georgia, if they're lucky enough to win this commitment and also get that signature down the road, I think that's a Georgia offense that could use more players like Denilan Morissette.
All right, let me squeeze one more thing in before we say goodbye to you here today. There is conventional wisdom out there. Georgia's got a couple scholarships to play with, and obviously we've thought about defensive back for one of those, even though Tyke Smith's kind of already in the fold as a transfer from West Virginia. And every time a defensive back shows up in the transfer portal, you're left to wonder, Could this be a name that Georgia might also consider? And we've kind of done the same thing a little bit with wide receiver, too, just because of the, I think, conventional belief that maybe Georgia's always looking to stock up that position group there as well. So when Xavier Worthy, leaves Michigan, you're kind of left to wonder, maybe this is a guy Georgia might consider. That ends up not being the case. Or Mike Woods leaves Arkansas, ends up not being the case. But for a while, you're kind of left to kind of wonder on that. Now you got Jamison Williams. No one's really we talked about Alabama and their wide receiver depth, but Ohio State can certainly rival that with its wide receiver depth there as well. Doesn't seem like Williams was getting as much playing time as he wanted, and now he's put his name in the transfer portal too, according to what a lot of the media outlets have kind of put out there on that. Obviously, as you see from the Rivals tweet there on the screen, for those of you watching on video, this is a former highly rated recruit here, like a lot of the Ohio State receivers are. Any chance that Georgia might get in the mix here on a transfer for a guy like Jamison Williams, former really big time recruit, as a part of just a loaded and deep Ohio State wide receiver situation?
Yeah, I think honesty is one of the things that I think would drive this recruitment, because I think what were we talking about earlier, Brandon? We want guys that put up the data, put up the stats, put up the points. Well, can you get any more high profile than Ohio State's offense over the last couple of years? Any more high flying with Sugarman Justin Fields at the helm? And I think he's got 15 catches, Brandon. I think he's a top 115 type player. I think he's got 15 catches, 9 of those last year for Ohio State. I don't think he was going to be one of the top receivers, top 3 receivers maybe. Maybe he was the number 3 or number 4 receiver at Ohio State going into this season, and apparently he's transferring out because he wants a greater role in a big-time offense than that. And I don't know if a guy like Jamison Williams to me comes in and immediately becomes one of the top 3 receivers at even a place like Georgia. That you think about it, is he better? Does he have better credentials? Does he have better production than Burton? No, not Burton's first year. You keep adding a guy like does Blaylock come back? What about Arian Smith? Similar player, similar skill set to Arian Smith. I don't think Jamison is quite as fast as Arian Smith. Jamison Williams is actually more of a hurdler in high school, 300-meter hurdler champion. I think he broke some of Ezekiel Elliott's records in high school for their state. It comes back down to this, Brandon. This is a guy that, when I heard an Ohio State receiver is in the transfer portal, and I'm not trying to stir up too much here, I was hoping for the intrigue of like a piece that a lot of teams could use. I was thinking of another name, because Ohio State has stacked up, tons of talent at wide receiver. I think they've gotten like 4 top 50 receivers over the last 2 or 3 cycles, and all those guys can't play either. You saw the 3 guys that they signed that were freshmen a year ago. Julian Fleming, names go on and on and on, man. And Jamison Williams is kind of a guy that's, you just got to look at that situation and said he probably thinks he's buried. He probably thinks he's not going to get the balls that he deserves to escalate his NFL draft stock. So I think it's one of those things. You throw Mike Woods in there in the mix. Is that a guy that Georgia will look at? Sure, Georgia's going to look at everybody at a position of need in the transfer portal. But if the guy's leaving Ohio State, he really wasn't a producer. It calls to mind a couple of questions in my mind.
All right, Jeff, great stuff. Thank you for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. I know you got some big surprises in store coming up over the course of the next couple of days at DawgNation.com there as well. So I'm looking forward to reading that, plus whatever happens with the Morissette later on today. I know you've got great stuff planned, so we can't wait to read about it.
All right, guys. Hey, have yourself a great weekend, Brandon, and continue on with another great show.
Thank you, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, let me just say this here really quick on the heels of obviously a good bit of Bama talk there, just because of all the first-round picks that they've had. And I do think that it is kind of amazing. I don't think the receivers at Alabama have gotten enough credit, because I think, at one point in time, everyone was so enamored by Tua Tagovailoa, and Tagovailoa is kind of treated as this transformational figure for the Bama program and college football. But the honest truth is that, Tua kind of leaves Alabama when he did with a lot less of a legacy than some people thought he might have. And the jury absolutely still out on him in terms of, is he really even the quarterback of the future for the Miami Dolphins? I mean, we're not 100% sure about that right now, which would lead me to believe that when it comes to the unbelievable offensive transformation that Alabama underwent, that actually it's the presence of those receivers that Tua got to throw to once he became Alabama's starting quarterback that actually is the real bedrock story for how that program became what it was, more so than Tungo Vailoa making those guys into stars. Those guys probably made Tungo Vailoa into a little bit more of a household name because we've seen Tua, not exactly be the bulletproof prospect than some people kind of assumed that he would be. I think at Georgia, though, the situation is going to be a little bit different. I think that quarterback can be a lever to just open up the floodgates for draft picks, that once you start producing first-round level quarterback play, all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier to have the wide receivers benefit from that, tight ends benefit from that, running backs even benefit from that. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, after all, was a first-round pick off that LSU team in 2019. Travis Etienne off what happened at Clemson playing alongside Trevor Lawrence. That quarterback can be a lever, and that lever for Georgia quite hasn't been pulled to the level of first-round pick type play. So if you get the big year from JT Daniels that you hope to get, and that starts a lineage of Carson Beck or Brock Vandagriff after that, or Gunnar Stockton after that, or whichever names you want to fill in there. If Georgia's about to go through a situation where it's playing the quarterback position at kind of a first-round level, something up until now under Kirby Smart it has not done, then all of a sudden the chances of you having a lot more first-round picks to go along with that, I think the chances of that increase because big-time play from the quarterback benefits the other positions there and that there as well. So we'll talk more about that as part of our SEC through. Let me also remind you that we're actually really coming to the end of our Kroger 5-Star Moms promotion. I think next week we're going to start giving out the winners. That's one per day coming up the week of Mother's Day. So a little bit of time for you to kind of get in here and get your nomination in there. So go to DawgNation.com. If you haven't heard us talking about this yet, I can't even believe the submissions. We've gotten hundreds of these. They've all, at least the people who've been reading them have been telling me, they are all just so touching and so inspiring, really, to see the role that family is playing in the audience, and I'm always happy about that. So DawgNation.com to find out more details about that. When you're ready to make your nomination for your own mother, the wife that you watch be a mother to your children, or just a mother that you know, info@DawgNation.com is the email address. And then next week we're announcing winners. It's a $50 gift card to Kroger, Bath & Body Works, and Home Chef. So this is really kind of very, very cool stuff. It's our Kroger 5-Star Moms promotion. It comes to a conclusion next week, so get involved right now while you can on that. As far as the rest of the SEC and the NFL draft, I've told you before that as a Falcons fan, I wasn't thrilled with the idea of Kyle Pitts going number 4 overall to Atlanta. First of all, I would have taken quarterback right there. I've been fairly clear that I would have taken Justin Fields. But the one thing that even someone like me, who's like, all-time Gator hater, so even someone like me has to acknowledge is that, Pitts is a pretty remarkable prospect. And the fact that it's even reasonable to even assume that he might be able to replace the production from someone like Julio Jones, who could be on his way out of Atlanta after June 1st. That says a lot about what Pitts did. And you go back and watch the highlights, and you watch all the, the game film that are kind of, republished as a part of this draft conversation. And you really do see a guy that runs step for step with cornerbacks and does so many things. There aren't many like Kyle Pitts. And I guess the one kind of silver lining to all this is it's going to be hard for Florida to sell, hey, come here and be the next Kyle Pitts. That's what they try to do for Rick Gilbert, it would seem. But it's hard to sell somebody on coming here and being the next Kyle Pitts when you really haven't seen someone like Kyle Pitts prior to this. The odds are there isn't a next Kyle Pitts, but certainly that's what Dan Mullen's going to try to push. Obviously, he also had Kadarius Toney go last night in the top 20 of the draft. That's a success. Listen, it pains me to say this, but that's a bit of a success story for Florida there, too. Just in that, no one would have had Toney on their first-round radar before the season began. You'll give Kadarius himself a lot of credit for that. He made himself into a better football player, but clearly he thrived last year for Florida, and so Florida gets to celebrate a couple of skill position guys going high in the draft. I still, I guess all things being equal, probably wouldn't have taken Pitts with that pick last night from the Falcons, but you kind of understand where you come from on that. I think Mac Jones going to New England is really interesting here because it's easy to say body type-wise, personality-wise, he just reminds you so much of Tom Brady. But I do think it's important to point out just how difficult in sports across the board, not just NFL, but sports across the board, just how difficult it's been to replace the all-time great, right? The Chicago Bulls try to do that with Michael Jordan, doesn't really work. Lakers try to do that post-Kobe Shaq, doesn't really work. Yankees try to do that, kind of post-Derek Jeter era. thus far, that kind of hasn't quite come to pass. Even if you want to talk about Braves, trying to move on from the Chipper Jones, big three pitching, that era, there's some hiccups along the way for that everybody just sort of seems like, well, since Mac Jones reminds you of Tom Brady, Bill Belichick has found his next Tom Brady. And I'm not just quite so sure that's necessarily the right way on that. I mean, the fact of the matter is, when you look at some of the personnel decisions that New England has made, kind of not always giving Brady some of the weapons that he needed. I kind of wonder, Jones clearly was thrilled last night to kind of follow in the footsteps of the organization that once Tom Brady called home. But I'm not quite so sure the one that Mac Jones is stepping in is anywhere near close to the same organization it once was. And by comparison, a lot of people are going to assume that Jones is more likely to be successful in New England than someone like, say, Justin Fields is in Chicago, just given the fact that Chicago has not had quarterback success in the past. But I think that's a little too simplistic in my mind. I don't mind Fields getting a chance to be the face of an organization. I mean, Chicago fans are going to love Justin Fields because they thought Andy Dalton was going to be their QB1. And looks like now Fields is about to take Martell, Andy Dalton, which Bears fans will be thrilled about. And that's just such a franchise that's so hungry for success. Obviously, to a degree, it creates more pressure for Fields, you might say, but it also just creates a chance for him to step into a situation that every good thing he does is just going to be magnified and celebrated so much by Bears fans who they just want to see that quarterback play well there. So just quick, synopsis of the quarterback for me. I mean, it seems like you're stepping into a bad situation because Chicago's been bad. But in the case of, San Francisco taking Trey Lance at 3 overall, you almost wonder if this is Kyle Shanahan falling in love with his own genius. Trey Lance just hasn't played very much football. I mean, give me Fields over any of the quarterbacks right now. Frankly, even with Trevor Lawrence going to Jacksonville, you understand why he goes number 1 overall, but you're stepping into a situation that's far from a given there as well, just given the coaching staff that Urban Meyer's trying to put together and the unresolved – there's still a lot for Urban Meyer to prove at the NFL level. So I think mixed expectations for a lot of the quarterbacks, but I don't see a reason why Fields couldn't be successful in Chicago and make that your SEC through. And as we wrap up here today, I'll remind you to go ahead and make your submissions for our Golden Shoe. We love giving those out as a part of our Gator Hater roll call each and every day. Best way for you to do that is to hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. Show me your Gator hating credentials, and we'll obviously celebrate you on the show as we have with so many people over the course of the last few months. That's been a really fun add-on to our show here, so looking forward to doing that. Hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, and you can get a chance to do that. Let me also say this. For those of you that want the most DawgNation coverage, one of my recommendations would be to make sure that you're subscribed to DawgNation on YouTube. Great video platform, not just shows like this, DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger, but also all the press conference stuff and all the other, player interviews. So many great things with Eric Stokes over the years. Find that all on the DawgNation YouTube page and get those notifications for when we go live. As we say goodbye to you on this Friday, how about a Gator Hater countdown? In 183 days, Dogs beat Florida. We'll see you Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down, air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that for you. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. They'll get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. And this time of year, that is a great thing to be thinking about. So your comments coming right now as we roll through all of this. Mike Anderson says there will be another 4 to 5 quarterbacks next year and the next, but generational tight ends don't hardly ever come. So I understand where you're coming from on that, but here's the thing. I think it can be very easy to get caught up in the moment of saying this is a generational tight end. But when you're making the evaluation of Pitts, and I'm not trying to be a hater here, I'm trying to be as objective as I can be, but when you're making the evaluation of Pitts, I do think you have to kind of have some long-range thinking in mind here as well, that in the moment we've all talked ourselves into, well, Pitts is a generational tight end. But 20 years from now, when you look back on this draft, this will be looked at as you took a tight end when you could have taken a quarterback, knowing that you're going to need one sooner rather than later. And history is not always kind to those kinds of decisions, that it's important not to be a prisoner of the moment, because all the hype that Pitts has gotten on TV, with good reason, by the way, but all the hype that he's gotten on TV as of late, 20 years from now, that's all going to be a distant memory. And all you're going to see is that TE next to his name. And history will not be kind if Pitts becomes something less than a generational tight end. If he becomes something like a normal tight end, even if it's a really good tight end, but if he becomes something like a normal tight end in comparison to quarterback, which obviously has the ability to potentially change the entire outlook of your organization, history won't be too kind to that. Tennille Calvino says, I want to talk to BA about it. What does Tennille want to talk about here? Let me see if I can scroll back up and find out about that. Steve Highland says about Wonderlic tests. Yeah, I don't really know how big of a deal that really even is anymore. I'm not quite so sure about that. Philip Jordan Wells calls Bears fans apoplectic. That's interesting. That's interesting. Keith Fold says they'll change the system to fit his talents. I'm assuming you mean Fields there on that. I mean, I'm not even really quite sure how much you even have to, kind of change the system on all that. I mean, let's not forget, Justin put up huge passing numbers with Ohio State here. Let's not forget that. Tennille, happy about Mac Jones not coming to San Francisco. So are you happier that Trey Lance is coming? Because my issue with the Lance is he just hasn't played very much football, and a lot of that's not his own fault. FCS didn't play in the fall last year, and he's obviously not going to play during the spring. So Tennille, as a 49ers fan, are you happier about it being Trey Lance? Because I guess my one concern there would be the fact that he just hasn't played much football. But I've told you before, I'm a huge Shanahan believer, so Shanahan has the chance to make anybody into a big player. But in the case of Trey Lance, it seems like a little bit of a roll of the dice for me. And Tennille says she is happy about that. Well, I'm happy that you're happy. Mike Anderson says history won't be kind if you miss out on a generational tight end either. That's a good point. Kind of reminds me of, to mix sports here for a moment, I remember when Allen Iverson was coming out of Georgetown, and there was debate about how high you draft him. And back at the time, conventional wisdom was, well, you can't draft a small guard that high. That was like kind of the talk back then of, Iverson's too small, he's a guard, and that's not the kind of player you draft near the front end of an NBA draft. And obviously, within the next few years, that idea was completely turned on its head, and that would seem foolish now. You just sort of draft best talent regardless of position. And that's an example of that we're kind of, I think this is a fair retort to some of the things that I said a moment ago, that we're kind of, in a kind of position here in 2021 where conventional wisdom has been, if it's a tight end, you don't take him that high. But there are plenty of people who say, well, Pitts is only just barely even a tight end. He may just be more like a really big wide receiver. And obviously, in large measure, football is becoming a little bit more positionless. And so maybe a few years from now, whatever misgivings someone might have about drafting a tight end that high in a draft, maybe that may seem passé in the next couple of years. Certainly a possibility. Especially when you see other examples at the college level of also these big tight ends kind of confounding the typical expectation for that position. Let's see what else. Bill Sanders says conventional wisdom is rarely either conventional or wisdom. That's probably pretty fair. Thomas Tyson says Eric Stokes, this on YouTube, Eric Stokes is going to ball. Too bad Rodgers won't be his quarterback. Yeah, that's kind of a messy situation, and it looks like Green Bay is going to try to draw a line in the sand right now, and we'll see if they're able to do that. Jay Shipes wants me to be Facebook deprogrammed. That's funny. Christopher Rule's also reminding us that the decal on the side of Stokes' helmet won't change. That big power G for both Green Bay and Georgia. That's exactly right. Yeah, a lot of these logos in sports that look similar have slight differences, but in the case of the Georgia G and the Green Bay Packers G, it is the same. It is the same image. Nature Gator says Pitts is highly developed tight end. He's an excellent line blocker now, so obviously Nature Gator loves his guy Pitts, and there's no surprise there on that. Grun D says watch 2 years from now when BA hypes Darnell Washington and he falls to the third, fourth round. So glad to see Grun having fun. Robert Barnes says if the Falcons would have drafted Fields, it would have split the fan base just like it did when he was at UGA. I guess so, but I think Atlanta was going to be split no matter what. As somebody who lives in the city, I mean, look, when you have the number 4 overall pick, there's going to be great debate about what you should do with it, and not drafting Fields is just as controversial as drafting Fields. It's just kind of one of those things that, fans are going to kind of be split on that. But ultimately, Atlanta-based quarterback would have sold tickets, I believe. So, but you are not going to be able to avoid debate on this. Now, listen, I still think Kyle Pitts will be well received. Even some of the people who wanted to see Atlanta go quarterback, when Pitts is out there playing big and doing big things, he'll be received well by Falcons fans, I do believe. Gita Cookie says, if Rodgers ends up somewhere else, it'd be cool if Stokes picked him off, and that would be really cool. Green Soldier checking back in to say, what have I missed the last 2 weeks? Green, it's good to have you back here, first of all, and a lot of draft talk certainly over the last few days, which has been really fun. It's a fascinating – listen, I'm amazed at how good of a TV show – and Green Soldier, as I said before, it's great to have you back with us today, but I'm amazed at how good of a TV show the NFL Draft is. I mean, it almost seems like it wouldn't be, right? Just reading names off a list. It is literally a meeting that could be an email, but it is still just so much fun to watch, especially – once the 49ers got going at 3 and when Atlanta did after that. I mean, you get past those first 2 picks that everyone knew what they were going to be, and that's just good drama. It is just good drama all the way around. A few more comments, and then I'm actually doing a virtual reading with my daughter's class today, so I have to get off the air quickly after that. Green Soldier says, when did Fields go? So, Green Soldier, are you serving our country right now? Are you away right now? Yeah, Fields goes 11 to the Bears. Bears trade up to get Justin Fields. Texas Dog says, come on, BA, the Falcons are going to draft Kyle Trask next. That's the thing I can't handle. Like, I can handle Pitts. I can't handle Kyle Trask as the supposed quarterback of the future of the Falcons. I just can't do that. That would be hard. That would be hard for me to take. And I don't really quite know why it's so different. I guess because one way or another, I do feel like Pitts is a really good player. But I can't have the heir apparent to Matt Ryan be Kyle Trask. I just can't have that. How about that guy referencing Roger Craig? Now, I'm assuming this is the former 49ers running back and not the former San Francisco Giants manager, but a great blast from the past. Roger Craig, one of the underrated backs in NFL history, underrated because he played on the 49ers team at the same time that Joe Montana and Jerry Rice were there, but big-time player for sure. Richard D. says that Fields could have won a national championship if he'd stayed at Georgia. He very well could have. I guess I'm just sort of glad that, I mean, listen, I've told you before, and I don't mean to kind of stir up, the past here, but I do think it was a mishandled situation when you lose a guy that ends up being the number 11 overall pick. That's not what you want to do a lot. You want to have that happen as infrequently as possible, and the fact that it didn't end up hurting Georgia worse than it did is probably, frankly, kind of a nice thing. I'm just sort of glad that it's over without it causing any more trouble than it did. Oh, Jay Shipes on the subject of Tecmo Bowl. Yeah. Old school Tecmo Bowl was great. Let's see what else. Cody Ledoux says Najee Harris to Pitt was a great pick. Yeah, I mean, it certainly feels like the kind of guy that could have success there. I guess, Cody, one of the things I have seen, guys like, I think it's Warren Sharp, I think. I guess some people have expressed some concern about Pittsburgh's ability to block for the run right now. That's probably getting a little deeper than my knowledge is on the situation with the Steelers, but there's been some analytics discussion about, you draft running back when your run block has been a little bit of an issue. So I can't say that one way or another. My initial reaction, Cody, was the same as yours, which was Najee to Pittsburgh felt like a really good fit. Let's see what else. Foster Moss says the Patriots probably saved Mac Jones' career. I mean, listen, he certainly feels like he's entering into a great situation, but I mean, just think about this. When was New England's ability to kind of cultivate those playmakers around quarterback is a problem. I mean, there's a reason why Tom Brady wanted to leave. Green Soldier, we are happy to have you back over here today. Christopher Rules, also like me, hoping to see Atlanta get Azeez Ojulari. I think it'd be great. I think it would be great. Let's see what else. Back over here on Facebook for a moment. Calvin Sanders says he thinks that Pitts will line up at receiver for the Falcons, and I think he probably will. I think he will do that a lot. Philip Jordan Wells not impressed with Matt Ryan's ability to throw deep. Yeah, I mean, that at times has been a little bit of a knock on him. Randy Hall says, I wonder how many 3-stars were drafted last night. I mean, you know, you're going to have in a normal draft about half or so be, you know, kind of 3-stars, sometimes a little bit less. I think last night less than that. People have written about this. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you know, the 5-star, the 4-star did about as well as you'd sort of expect them to based on the percentage of the populations. Mike Little wondering about Richard LeCount, where he ends up going. I guess you're on LeCount watch, maybe starting on a Saturday, like a 4th, 5th, 6th round type situation for Richard LeCount. That seems to be conventional wisdom for him. I don't personally see him going 2nd or 3rd round, so you're probably thinking about like a 4th through 6th situation. Corey Ray Doyle says the Rodgers situation's crazy. It really is. And, you know, not to get off the normal subject of what we're supposed to be talking about here, but here's one of the things I do think is interesting, is that a lot of these teams like the idea, you know, you see, you know, multiples of teams drafting quarterbacks. In some cases, you even saw the Packers a year ago draft a quarterback when they didn't quite need one yet. Teams are thinking about their next generation quarterback, like Atlanta, who we mentioned a moment ago, you know, potential candidate for quarterback. But if drafting a quarterback to sit when you could have used that pick as an asset for your current quarterback, if it makes them mad, does that kind of convince some teams not to do that? In other words, did drafting Jordan Love, Green Bay thought they were smart because they're planning for quarterback of the future, and it had worked out great for them the last time they tried that, drafting Rodgers to sit behind Brett Favre. But Brett Favre's personality apparently a little bit more agreeable than Aaron Rodgers is. And Rodgers as upset about the lack of weapons around him as he is about the fact that Green Bay took a quarterback to eventually replace him. You kind of wonder if the Rodgers thing scares some teams away from drafting quarterbacks. I think that's a fairly fascinating subplot. Keith Lamb says Ryan still has good football left in him. Maybe he does. It's just some of this kind of stuff, Keith, to me, comes down to a timing situation of, you know, you hope you're not drafting 4th overall again. That's why I would have taken quarterback right there, because it's your best chance, you would think, to get a high-value quarterback. And, you know, I would expect Ryan to still play at a fairly high level this year, but what about in 2022? You know, at that point in time, and by the way, Atlanta could get some salary cap relief, I believe, for Ryan before next season if they do what they're contemplating doing with Julio Jones, which is move him after June the 1st. So, I mean, this is all about timing, and Falcons are hideously over the salary cap. Just a mess. Matt Rukavina feels like Georgia's got multiples of first-round picks coming in future years. Maybe so. There's certainly plenty of candidates, but one of the things I guess, Matt, I don't really feel comfortable doing is saying that, well, you know, it's obviously going to happen, right? Like, you can rubber stamp this guy in the first round, that guy in the first round. It's just not quite that easy to do. And just because, you know, Team X or Team Y makes it look easy, there are a lot of other teams trying to have the same level of success, and they haven't quite done that yet. John Adams mentioned the possibility of a Davis Mills to Atlanta, which would be another kind of local connection and a fairly interesting name if that does go down that way. Jim McLaughlin, the subject of Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of things about Rodgers' off-field personality that I will admit that I'm kind of with Jim on. I don't know all the inner workings of all of it, but what I have paid attention to, frankly, seems pretty weird. Jose Cuervo shouting out some congratulations to Eric Stokes. Love to see that. Let's see what else. A couple more before we go. Robert Barnes says in the NFL, salary cap causes teams to change the way they play from one year to the next. It's a huge consideration because it's not like the NBA where you can have a luxury tax threshold and things like that. The NFL has a hard cap. It is a hard cap in which you can't exceed. And obviously, listen, there are ways around it, but that's full-time jobs for people in that organization who are constantly trying to figure out some of those ways around it, because it is the number one consideration for roster management for sure. Let's see what else. William Perry thinks that Mac Jones, quote, won getting a chance to go to New England, and there's certainly some conventional wisdom behind that, even though my opinion is slightly different. There's certainly some conventional wisdom behind that. All right, we got to get ready to go. J.C. Howell says, talking about Fields going to the Bears, the offensive line there was terrible last year. Yeah, I mean, they got some problems. There's no question about that, but no question about that. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Lamar L. says it's going to be a great second and third round for the Dogs, and I think it has a very good chance to be. Could hear a lot of names called, and that will certainly be a lot of fun. Of course, if you want to get more information about what's going to happen for everything going on around Atlanta, including the NFL draft, which is ongoing here today, make sure you check out Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. Our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution provide some great information and all kinds of stuff for the Falcons and the rest of the NFL in the second and the third round as it plays out. Check all of that out. Also, some pretty wild news there as well. The president was in town yesterday. You can read about that, but also some crazy other stuff kind of going on here right now. Cinco de Mayo's coming up, too, in addition to Mother's Day. Not too early to start planning your Cinco de Mayo plan, so check that out online. Our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution there at AJC.com. Make sure you check that out. Y'all have a great day. Thanks for being here for R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Of course, you can check them out. rsandrews.com. The RS stands for Rapid Service. They'll get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. That's a great thing this time of year. So find them online, rsandrews.com. Hope all of you have a great weekend. I'll see you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, and I'll look forward to talking to you then.